Good evening, all, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's story. If you enjoy it, please remember to subscribe and like the video so we can continue bringing you more horror stories. Now, without further ado, take a deep breath and relax as we take a journey through the night. I always thought I knew fear. I had skydived at 14, scaled sheer rock faces without a rope, and dove into the ocean's depths more times than I could count. But nothing compared to the terror of that last cage dive. It was supposed to be the experience of a lifetime. An illegal trip, sure, but that only made it more thrilling. No tourist gimmicks, no reinforced bars, just raw steel and the deep blue, staring straight into the gaping jaws of nature's most perfect predator. The captain, a wiry man named Rourke with salt-stiff hair and a grin that never quite reached his eyes, had promised a real encounter. "You want the big ones?" he'd said, dragging a cigarette to the corner of his mouth. "The kind that make your bones hum? You'll get 'em." I should have turned back when I saw the boat. It was rusted, barely holding together, its name scraped off long ago. The deck smelled of rotting fish, the scent clawing at the inside of my nose. The crew was silent, their eyes dark and sunken, moving through the motions without enthusiasm, like they'd rather be anywhere but here. But the money was already paid, and the thrill seeker in me had already strapped into my wetsuit. We reached open waters by sundown. The ocean stretched out like a dark, endless void. Rourke barked orders, and the crew began baiting the water with bloody chunks of meat. The scent carried fast, thick and nauseating, dissipating into the waves. Then we waited. At first there was nothing, just the rhythmic slosh of the waves against the boat, the distant caw of gulls. Then slowly, the water changed. The first fin cut through the surface, black as a shadow, followed by another. Then another. I grinned, adrenaline singing through my veins. "We've got company." Rourke chuckled, but it sounded hollow. "You could say that." The sharks circled, sleek bodies gliding effortlessly beneath the waves. But something was off. They weren't lunging for the bait. They weren't thrashing, weren't feeding. They were just watching. A cold unease settled in my stomach. The crew worked fast, lowering the cage into the water. Unlike the tourist cages I'd been in before, this one looked barely intact. The bars were thinner, rusted in places. My gut clenched, but I ignored it. I climbed in. The cage hit the water with a lurch, descending into the murky depths. At first, all I could hear was my own breath, the slow hiss of oxygen through the regulator. The water around me darkened, the silhouettes of the sharks growing sharper, more defined. Then the light above me disappeared. Something massive had moved over the boat, blocking out the sun entirely. My chest tightened. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a regular shark, but it was far too large. It had a body 5 times larger and longer than the sharks that swam nearby. What little light that made it down to where we were at illuminated its skin just a little. Its skin was dark red, and it had 2 massive white eyes. Its mouth stretched wide enough to fit the entire boat in, with room left over. When it opened its mouth, all I could see were rows of razor-sharp teeth. The other sharks scattered, vanishing into the dark. My fingers gripped the rusted bars so tightly my knuckles burned. My breath grew heavy, fogging the inside of my mask. The thing hovered just beyond the cage, its massive body undulating like a snake, moving in slow, unnatural motions. Then from the depths of that impossible maw, I heard something I should not have been able to hear underwater. A whistle. Then there was another whistle, fainter, coming from deeper. There was more than one, and they were talking. I let out a choked gasp, bubbles rushing toward the surface. I turned, grabbing at the chain to signal the crew to pull me up. But the chain was gone. My stomach dropped. I looked up, expecting to see the boat rocking above me. There was nothing but darkness. The surface had vanished. Panic clawed at my throat. I kicked against the cage, shaking it violently. But it didn't move. My breaths came too fast, too shallow. The thing beyond the bars cocked its head, its gaping mouth forming a grotesque mockery of a smile. Then it moved. It didn't swim. It shifted. One moment it was 10 feet away. The next its teeth were inches from the bars. I screamed, a burst of bubbles escaping past my lips. The bars groaned. I thrashed, kicking against the metal, pushing myself as far back as I could. My oxygen tank scraped against the cage. The metal bent inward, the rusted welds creaking under pressure. The thing put the cage in its mouth as if it were about to swallow it whole. Then the bars snapped. I shot upward, adrenaline shoving me past the limits of panic. My lungs screamed as I kicked for the surface, my vision blurring. The water churned around me, something pulling at my leg. I tore free, kicking harder, lungs ready to burst. The darkness above me finally thinned, the first glimmers of light breaking through. And then hands, human hands, grabbed me, yanking me onto the deck. I collapsed onto my side, gasping, coughing up seawater. Sea salt stung my eyes. The boat rocked beneath me. A shadow loomed over me. Rourke, his face ashen, his hands trembling. "You saw it," he whispered. I nodded, shuddering violently. "What the hell was that?" He didn't answer. He just turned, staring out over the water. The ocean was calm again, undisturbed, but I knew better. I used to think the ocean was silent. That was before I spent my days on the trawler, before I learned that the sea is never quiet. Even in the stillness of dawn, when the waters stretch glass smooth to the horizon, something stirs beneath the surface. The depths are alive with whispers, groans, and things I dare not name. We hear them in the daylight. Strange calls carried on the wind, half-formed voices drifting from the waves, never clear, never quite human. Some of the crew joke about sirens, old spirits of drowned men calling for company. I used to laugh along with them, but now I only listen, because at night those voices turn into something else. At night we fear them. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of the moonlight. We had been hauling the nets for hours, our backs aching with the weight of the catch, the stink of salt and fish thick in the air. The wind had died, leaving only the rhythmic slap of water against the hull. I was working the winch when I noticed something floating beside the boat. A body, pale, bloated, rolling with the current. Its mouth was open, but not in an expression of pain. It was smiling. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I wanted to call out, but something in my gut told me to keep quiet. As I watched, the body drifted closer, as if drawn toward us, as if it knew we were there. And then it moved, not the natural, sluggish drift of something long dead. No, it twitched, its hands flexing just beneath the surface. The lips, those cold, stiff lips, whispered something. I couldn't hear it, I didn't want to hear it. A wave lifted it, and for a brief, merciful moment, the body sank beneath the water and was gone. But I knew then that we were not alone out here, and we never had been. The captain doesn't like us talking about what we see. Bad luck, he says, to dwell on what belongs to the sea. But men still talk. They whisper in the galley, their voices hushed and tight, as if the things beneath the waves might hear. They talk about the catch, how some nights the nets come up heavy with more than fish, how some of the creatures we drag from the deep don't belong to any world we know, and how every now and then one of them is still alive. Last week, Mateo found something in the nets just before dawn, a shape tangled in the mess of seaweed and writhing fish, limbs too long, skin like something that had been left to soak in brine. It wasn't human, but it wasn't not human either. We burned it before the sun came up. But the next night we heard something knocking against the hull. I don't know how long I've been at sea. The days blur together, marked only by the ritual of work, by the dragging up of things that should have stayed buried. My skin is raw with salt, my hands cracked and red. At night, I dream of water filling my lungs, of voices calling my name from the blackness below. I wake up gasping, but it doesn't feel like I ever truly wake up. Because the dreams don't stop when I open my eyes. I hear them. Even when no one else does, I hear them. Last night, I stood at the edge of the deck, staring down at my reflection in the water. It didn't move when I did. I should have been afraid. Instead, I leaned closer, and it smiled at me. We may never know for sure what lurks in the deep. We can only bury what remains in the aftermath. But what concerns me most is that I may become them. I've always respected the ocean. It's not fear, not exactly, but an understanding that beneath the surface, there's an entire world we know almost nothing about. I thought I had seen everything: giant squid, deep-sea predators, creatures that had never seen sunlight, but nothing could have prepared me for what we found that day. We were on the Lucille, a research vessel tracking great white sharks off the coast of South Africa. My team and I had been tagging specimens for months, mapping their migratory patterns. It was routine work, something I had done a dozen times before. The sun was bright, the waves calm, and the air smelled like salt and dead fish. We had tagged 5 great whites that morning when the tracker went berserk. What the hell? Brian, our lead technician, frowned at his monitor. Tag 117 just moved 2 miles in under a minute. I leaned over his shoulder, staring at the blinking dot on the screen. That's impossible. Even at full speed, no great white moves that fast. The dot zigzagged erratically, covering impossible distances in seconds. It was as if something was dragging the shark at an inhuman speed. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the signal went dead. Silence filled the cabin, the soft hum of the boat's engine the only sound. We exchanged uneasy glances. Did the tag malfunction? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Brian shook his head. No, the tag's gone. The whole damn shark just disappeared. We decided to investigate. We were about 20 miles from the last recorded location of the shark, and by the time we arrived, the sun had dipped low on the horizon. The water had darkened, taking on an unsettling inky blue. We dropped the submersible camera, watching the live feed on the cabin's monitors as it descended. The first thing we saw was blood. A thick red cloud hung in the water, tendrils curling and spreading like ink. The deeper the camera sank, the murkier the water became. Then something came into view. A shark, or rather, what was left of it. The great white's body was torn in half, jagged wounds running down its torso, as if something had ripped it apart with raw strength. Chunks of flesh floated freely, organs spilling from the gaping cavity where its belly used to be. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Jesus Christ. Something ate it, Brian whispered. Something big. Then the camera flickered. For a brief moment, the feed turned to static, lines of distortion running across the screen. Then it cleared, and we saw it. The darkness behind the mutilated shark shifted. Something moved. A shape, massive, pale, featureless, emerged from the abyss. It had no eyes, no fins, no discernible features other than its glistening, translucent skin stretched over an impossibly large frame. The creature pulsed, shifting in slow, deliberate undulations, as if tasting the water. Then it opened its mouth. Rows of needle-like teeth unfolded from its flesh, spiraling inward in an endless tunnel of jagged white. And from the depths of that writhing maw, a sound escaped. Not a roar, not a growl, just a light whisper, carried through the deep like a dying breath. My blood turned to ice. The monitor cut to black. Panic set in immediately. "Pull the camera up," I shouted, heart hammering. Brian scrambled for the controls, but the winch groaned, struggling against resistance. The cable jerked, yanking the entire ship sideways as if something below had grabbed hold. The Lucille lurched, sending us tumbling into the walls of the cabin. Then, snap. The line severed and the camera was gone. A moment of silence, then a thump. Something hit the bottom of the boat, a single heavy impact that rattled my bones. Another came, then another. Thump, thump, thump. "We need to move," Brian yelled, stumbling to his feet. I grabbed the radio. "Mayday, mayday! This is the Lucille requesting immediate..." Silence. No static, no interference, just nothing. The thumping stopped. We stood frozen, listening to the oppressive quiet. The boat drifted, the once gentle waves now eerily still. Then something rose from the water. At first, I thought it was an enormous jellyfish, a translucent, glistening mass breaking the surface. But as it lifted higher, I saw limbs, long, tendril-like appendages, boneless but strong, curling around the railing of the boat like fingers. Then slowly, it pulled itself up. A grotesque, shifting mass of flesh and teeth loomed over us, its pale form glistening under the moonlight. Its mouth stretched open, revealing those countless, spiraling rows of teeth, and the sound came again. Unlike any animal I had heard before, the sound seemed unnatural. I moved before I could think, grabbing Brian by the collar and shoving him toward the helm. "Go!" He didn't hesitate. The engine roared to life, the Lucille lurching forward. The creature let out a hollow, reverberating moan that made my vision swim. I plugged my ears with my fingers as the sound pierced through the air. Then it dove. The boat rocked violently as the thing vanished beneath the waves. My breath came in ragged gasps. We were still alive, but we weren't alone. The Coast Guard found us the next morning, drifting aimlessly miles from our original coordinates. We told them we lost our submersible, that we encountered an aggressive shark. We didn't tell them the truth, because ever since that night, I haven't been able to sleep. When I close my eyes, I hear it, waiting. Something is down there, something that sees us. And I know, deep in my bones, that one day soon, it's going to come back.